A young doctor saves a billionaire's life with a groundbreaking treatment, only to be offered a fraction of the promised reward. Charles Whitmore III, the untouchable face of Wall Street, thought he could buy his way out of gratitude. But Dr. Emily Carter had one move that would turn his own power against him. And just wait until you hear how the tables turned and why justice, in the end, won completely. The clinic felt like another world compared to the streets outside. Down below, Manhattan roared with the constant hum of sirens, honking taxis, and impatient footsteps on concrete. Up here, 22 floors above it all, the noise faded into nothing but a faint hum, replaced by the precise tick, tick, tick of the wall clock. The floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the room in pale winter light, making every surface, the glass desk, the chrome medical instruments, gleam like they'd been polished just seconds ago. Dr. Emily Carter stood near the desk, double-checking the patient file one last time. She wasn't supposed to be here, not at this level, not yet. 27 years old, barely 5 years out of medical school, and already working on an experimental treatment that most senior physicians called too ambitious or just impossible. But she had seen the early trial data. She knew it could work. If this case succeeded, it wouldn't just save a life, it would prove her right in front of the entire medical community. And deep down, she knew this patient, whoever he was, could become the name tied to her breakthrough. The double glass doors swung open with the soft whoosh of the hydraulic hinges. And then, he walked in. Charles Whitmore III. Even if she hadn't seen his face in business magazines or on TV interviews, she would have known immediately. He carried himself like someone used to being the most important person in every room. Chin slightly lifted, pace unhurried, gaze sweeping the space as if assessing whether it was worthy of him. The scent of expensive cologne reached her before he did, understated yet calculated to be noticed. His charcoal suit had that unmistakable precision of bespoke tailoring. The stitching alone could have paid off her student loans. A steel watch hugged his wrist, its brand discreet but instantly recognizable to anyone who followed the stock market pages. He didn't slow down as he approached, didn't extend a hand, didn't ask for her name. Instead, he stopped just a few feet away, standing tall enough to force her to tilt her chin slightly to meet his eyes. And then, with a tone halfway between command and provocation, he said, "Heal me, and I'll pay you $1 million." The words weren't a plea, they were a test, a dare. For a moment, the room seemed even quieter. Emily felt her jaw tense, not from intimidation, but from the sheer bluntness of it. She read his posture instantly. This was a man used to control, used to people bending. But Emily didn't bend. She took a deliberate step forward, closing the space between them just enough to match his presence. Her voice came out even, steady, the kind that left no room for doubt. "Then get the check ready." The faintest flicker of surprise crossed his eyes before he masked it with a smirk. But in that split second, Emily knew she'd passed the first test, and maybe, just maybe, she'd set one for him too. In the beginning, Emily kept her distance. She treated Charles Whitmore like any other high-profile patient, precise, efficient, polite, but never personal. She told herself it was for professionalism's sake, but the truth was, she didn't want to get drawn in to whatever game he was playing. But illnesses have a way of peeling back the layers people hide behind. It was late on the third night when she noticed it first. Charles was in the middle of reviewing a thick folder of legal contracts his assistant had brought in. Emily stood by, waiting for his blood pressure reading to stabilize. The pen in his hand slipped, just slightly, just enough for the signature to look uneven. He froze, staring at it longer than necessary, then flipped the page without a word. The next morning, during a routine motor skills test, she asked him to tap his fingers in sequence on the arm of the chair. The rhythm was off. Not by much, but enough for her trained mind to mark it as a change. She saw his jaw clench, not in pain, but in frustration, the kind that comes from knowing your body isn't obeying like it used to. Then there were the moments he thought no one noticed. At night, when the blinds were drawn and the clinic's lights cast long shadows on the walls, she'd hear him on the phone, voice steady at first, then dipping, softening, almost breaking before he caught himself. She wasn't supposed to hear the words, but the pauses told her enough. He was asking about things he'd always handled alone, delegating decisions he used to control without effort. Emily realized the truth. The arrogance, the dismissive tone, the constant need to dominate the conversation, it wasn't just personality, it was armor, and that armor was cracking. The clinical reports confirmed what her instincts already knew. His condition was advancing faster than he'd publicly admitted. The man who had built an empire on control was losing it, inch by inch, and doing everything he could to hide the fear that came with it. Something shifted in her then. She still didn't trust him, she still didn't particularly like him, but she couldn't ignore what she saw, the fight to keep hold of himself, the silent panic behind his eyes. So she matched his fight with her own. She worked past midnight more nights than she could count, recalibrating dosage levels to the smallest decimal. She triple-checked lab results, sometimes rerunning them just to be certain. Meals went untouched, coffee cooled to a bitter film on her desk, and the skyline outside her window blurred into a background she barely registered anymore. She wasn't doing it for the promised million. She wasn't even doing it for her career. She was doing it because she believed no one, not even a man who walked into her life like a storm and tried to buy his way out of it, deserved to have their identity stolen by a disease. And in that silent agreement, unspoken between them, the real battle began. 6 weeks of relentless work, 6 weeks of balancing on the edge of exhaustion, of carefully adjusting treatments until every vital sign pointed in the right direction. The latest scans were clear. The tremors had lessened. Motor control was returning. For the first time since she'd met him, Charles Whitmore walked into a room without hiding the steadiness of his hands. Emily had every reason to believe this was the day she'd finally see the guarded expression on his face break into genuine relief. But this wasn't her clinic. This was his world now. His penthouse office sat at the top of a glass tower. The city stretched out below like a glittering ocean of light. It smelled faintly of leather and expensive cologne. Every piece of furniture looked like it had been chosen for a magazine spread. Dark wood, deep armchairs, a desk that seemed almost too perfect to work on. Emily stood near the window, holding the final reports. "The treatment has worked," she said, her voice steady. "Your condition is stable. The regression is significant. We've achieved what most specialists thought impossible." For a moment he didn't react. Then, slowly, Charles leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced behind his head. A grin spread across his face. Not the smile of a man relieved to have his life back, but the self-satisfied curve of someone who just won a game only he knew was being played. "I'll wire you," he paused, as if calculating a number for dramatic effect. "Let's say 50,000. It's generous for someone your age." The words landed like a heavy blow. Emily felt her chest tighten, but not because of the money, because in that instant, every sleepless night, every hour she'd poured into keeping him alive was reduced to a casual toss of loose change. It wasn't payment, it was dismissal. The unspoken message was clear. You should be grateful I'm giving you anything at all. Her fingers tightened around the folder in her hands, the edges digging into her skin. For a few seconds, she let the silence stretch between them, studying him. The relaxed posture, the faint amusement in his eyes, the way he was already reaching for his phone, as if the matter were settled. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharper than steel. "Then I suppose you won't mind if the Wall Street Journal hears how Charles Whitmore refused to pay the doctor who saved his life." His hand froze mid-reach. For the first time since they'd met him, Emily saw something flicker across his face that wasn't arrogance. It wasn't fear yet, but it was close. By sunrise, the story was everywhere. News sites splashed it across their front pages. Billionaire refuses to pay doctor after miracle recovery. Social media lit up with outrage. Clips of Charles Whitmore at public events, smiling for cameras, were now paired with captions calling him the man who tried to shortchange his own lifesaver. In just hours, his carefully polished image began to unravel. Stock prices for his company wavered, then dipped. Investors called for explanations. Commentators on morning shows shook their heads, dissecting the arrogance of a man who would risk everything over a broken promise. By midday, the whispers inside his own boardroom had grown too loud to ignore. Pressure mounted from every direction: business partners, shareholders, even longtime allies who now saw him as a liability. That afternoon, a public statement appeared on every major platform. Whitmore's voice, usually so sure, carried a new edge of restraint. "I regret the misunderstanding and have the utmost respect for Dr. Emily Carter's work. She is a pioneer in her field." Within the hour, Emily's account lit up with a transfer. Not just the promised million, but an additional $500,000, labeled in the memo line as compensation for the misunderstanding. But for Emily, the victory was never about the number. She used part of it to expand her clinic, adding treatment rooms and funding therapies for patients who would never be able to pay for them. The rest she funneled quietly, anonymously, into research grants for young doctors, the kind of people she wished someone had believed in when she was starting out. As for Charles Whitmore, he learned a truth that money had never taught him. There are people in this world who cannot be bought. And in that glass-walled office weeks earlier, the real power hadn't belonged to the billionaire at all. It had belonged to the young doctor who never flinched when he scoffed, and proved, without raising her voice, that keeping your word is worth more than any fortune.